Hello everybody and good morning. Welcome to the Top Producer Show. So our mission is to educate, equip, and train servant leaders. Our vision is to create financially independent achievers, and our purpose is to help people grow. And right now we're going over the book by Grant Cardone. If you're not first, you are last. So before we jump into chapter 1, 4 responses to economic contractions. So before we jump into that, we want to invite some people on here. And this just takes a second. Alrighty then.
Okay, Chance, what's up, man? Top of the morning. Jordan is here. What is going on? Okay, so there are 4 responses to economic contractions. So again, we're going over Grant Cardone's book. If you're not first, you're last. This was actually written in 2010 because I was reading it and I was like, damn, how did he know the economy was going to get messed up? And then I was like, wait a minute, this was the last time. Which means history repeats, which is not good, by the way. Unfortunate, right? There are 4 basic responses people have during economic conditions, and one that counts. And he talks about these 4, and I've got some notes here that I took for the very beginning of this. So, 4 responses. The first one is the cheerleader response. I refuse to participate, aka the temper tantrum. Sometimes it's just irrational, unrealistic expectations. 2, the old school response, nothing has changed, let's just get back to basics. 3, the quitter response, there's nothing I can do, just have to get, out of this. And then the advance and conquer, every resource goes into advancing and conquering. So, he goes into this. Let me explain, as you move through each one of these stages of recovery, and as you build and rebuild your businesses, you will make choices in how you respond. So the cheerleader response, that's the first one. So here's what Grant has to say. He says, simply refuses to participate. He actually was at a car dealership. I'm going to try to copy this here. For whatever reason, Apple likes to put everything in like crazy, I think it's like 0.4 font. And you're like, what the hell are you saying? Shamala's here, hello. So, now I can actually see it. So the cheerleader response simply refuses to participate. Grant agrees, but he said there are 2 versions of this. One is workable and one is not. The first suggests that you basically not partake in the thinking, actions, behaviors of those agreeing with economic contraction. Grant agrees, but it's kind of best not to buy into the negativity. Maintaining a total positive and somewhat unrealistic attitude during times of serious contraction is the best state of temporary denial. So that's kind of what he really says. Is he said the cheerleader kind of is more denial than anything. It's hard to deny that credit, it's hard to deny when creditors are tightening up. It's hard to deny when banks aren't loaning money. It's hard to deny when individuals are spending less and people are losing jobs. Like, that's undeniable. And like what's going on right now, people are looking for work, and it's harder now to find work because, the interview process is messed up. You can't get to people. You're waiting on people to get back to you. Things are on Zoom, the computer doesn't work. And meanwhile, you're trying to keep everything on, right? You're trying to keep your lights on. You're trying to keep your heat on. You're trying to keep the electricity going. You're trying to keep your internet on. So that way you can do these things, your phone bill. So in 2010, as I write this, 20% of all teenagers in this country are unemployed. And I think he's talking about eligible to work, like 18, 19-year-olds. So if your product or service is dependent upon demographic, your business is going to be affected. Meaning if your target market is the people who are unemployed and there's more of them unemployed now, you're going to have a problem. Over 10% of the workforce is unemployed. That was in 2010. In some locations, it's 15% and climbing. Well, obviously, we saw even more drastic than that with what just happened. Add to this all of the financial damage caused by fear, anxiety, uncertainty, lack of confidence, which is actually more devastating than the actual facts and figures themselves. The auto business in 2010 was down 40%. So think about this. Think about the trickle-down effect. Everybody's like, oh, the trickle-down effect doesn't work. Think about the trickle-down effect of, the economy having major issues with what? With the mortgage industry. The mortgage industry cut back, and all of a sudden, all the people affected by the mortgage industry, which is banking and finance. So the banking finance industries pulled back all of their money. Credit lines became shorter or disappeared. Interest rates went up. So which means, can you imagine that business goes down, but your payments go up? Like, that's not a good scenario to be in. He said retail was at 25-year lows. Massive amounts of wealth and equity basically disappeared with a downturn of the housing prices. People have seen, 401ks cut in half. Banks are failing. Credit is being frozen. Positive sayings and optimistic attitudes alone are basically not just going to get you through. You got to do something. You can't just cheer your way out. Only those who take correct action will advance. Most people's approach to change in the economy in the same way they do. Most people react the same way as they do to earthquakes. They simply don't prepare. They simply don't prepare. They're going to have, it's like what happened in Texas. I hate to say this. It's like, no, it's not normal for Texas to get snow, but Texas gets snow. That's not the first time that's happened. It's just everybody ignores it and it's like, well, we hope it doesn't happen next time. We'll see what happens out of this, last mess. No, and here's the thing. Texas has never, in what I remember, has never really gotten hit the entire state. I remember when the top got hit because I was in Oklahoma City about 10 years ago. I was in Oklahoma City, or just south of Oklahoma City, and I remember there was a storm that came through and they're like, oh my God, we got snow in Oklahoma, and Texas got snow, but we don't know what to do. But it's not the first time it's happened. It's just people are unprepared for it because it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. Well, it's normally warm, we'll be fine. It warms up the next day, we're good. But not prepared for a week of below 20 degrees or whatever the hell it was, which is horrible. I'm not saying it's not bad. I'm just saying it's not like an anomaly that it happened. People are just unprepared. Old school response. So the old school response, back to the basics. He said so this is the second way to look at things. The old school response. So back to the basics. One of his car executives actually said this to Grant. He's like, your industry, so Grant looked at him and said, your industry went from selling 16 million cars to 9 million cars, which is the lowest it's sold in 25 years. Every deal depends solely on advertising to drive traffic, something dealers will no longer be able to justify, meaning the money to drive traffic to their location. And your sales force doesn't have the first clue on how to generate its own traffic. Banks are tightening up. The media is telling everybody never to spend money again. And your response to all this is back to basics. So people have unrealistic expectations of what actually needs to happen. And he pointed out, he's like, yeah, returning to the fundamentals is a good idea. That's part of it. but you're going to have to do something different. Change is needed. So he kind of goes into this. While I support the overall concept of returning to fundamentals in the industry and absolutely agree that the basics are vital for success, you can't depend on basically block and tackle strategy is going to get you there. If you're 3 touchdowns down and behind and you have 2 minutes left and it's the last quarter, in other words, you can't make advances on business with just basics. It's going to take some big plays in a very short period of time. So you're going to have to explode out of the mud is what another way to put it. There's a lot of levels of basics to get through before you can finally get down to the most fundamental one. That which will get you traction and basically change the market. It's also vital you understand the age, experience, and improvements in technology all influence the person. So he's talking about social media. He's talking about getting out in front of people. This is 2010. Talk about being, ahead of your time. He says, if you sold products during the 1970s oil crisis, for instance, and another person only sold between 1998 and 2008, your definitions of basics would be drastically different. The definition of basics for the person who sells encyclopedias door to door varies greatly from that person who sells the hottest in-demand technological gadget, and people cannot get to them enough. He says, I built my first company going door to door. Businesses all over America, and I did it during a severe recession. People weren't coming to me to buy my service, so I had to go knock on their door. So what he's talking about is a completely different approach to what you're doing. Sometimes you have to explode out. I couldn't afford advertising or huge marketing campaigns, and I didn't have a sales team to do this for me. I was an unknown, unproven commodity. So we actually learned at 10X, Damon John. Is it Damon John? Damon John? Yeah, from FUBU. Had an amazing story about how he advertised. And he's like, look, the path from, I believe it was New Jersey into New York City is like 15 miles. It takes like 3 hours to get through, but it takes 15 miles. And there's all of these small businesses that have these sort of garage doors kind of pulling down. And he's like, hey, is there any way I can paint something on your door that you're a FUBU registered, distributor? Licensed distributor. And, he got a bunch of people. He went door to door because he didn't have any money. And he ended up putting that together and painting those over the period, I want to say, of like 2 years. Later, there was a advertising marketing company that kind of did the math on it. He goes, you basically had, and he did it for free. Like there was no charge. He just came in and painted it and did it himself or with his guys. Later, there was an advertising marketing company that said that was probably worth $45 million in advertising that he did for free. So it pays to what? Be creative, especially during hard times. He said, the point I'm trying to make here is to claim that an organization just needs to get back to basics is like the wannabe speaker who cannot get an audience. You must get yourself and the organization focused on creating a future instead of one focused merely on getting back to doing what you were doing before. It's like, hey, this is changing. What do we need to do now? Things are way beyond changing, and change requires actions beyond the basics. You don't change the times. If you don't change the times, you'll be left behind. To that end, even the basics change over time. While we certainly shouldn't disregard the basics of principles of success, you do need to cultivate the basics that we're using, inside. He says, consider the fact that the basics during the times of expansion are different than those during contraction, because you can't afford to make a mistake. So when everything's expanding and money's easy, you can try different forms of advertising that are weird that you've never tried before. You're like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But you can't do that necessarily during bad times unless you absolutely positively know. Think back to a time when you were extremely motivated to succeed and had to perform at a high level. You simply had to get results, and therefore you probably went beyond the basics and switched to serious performance mode. And I was taught this through David Bird. He's like, your basic human instinct is you're always going to return back to what you're used to. Your basic human instinct basically keeps you in a comfort zone where nothing ever changes. What does that mean? I mean, think of it this way. Your activity level, whatever it is your comfort zone. So let's say your activity level is you're going to talk to 2 people a day about your business, just for instance. That activity level will lead you right to bankruptcy, basically. I mean, you'll never make it, but it's a good starting place. It's a good starting place. Hey, let's get out of the blocks. Let's talk to 2 people a day. So you track 2 people a day and you realize you're not fucking getting anywhere, because that's really not going to get you anywhere. Why is that? The point of 2 a day was just to get you started, just to get you going. What's the problem? The problem is if you can do it over a sustained period of time, it becomes your comfort zone. It's almost like an invisible wall that you're building yourself into. Now all of a sudden you realize you need to get to the next level and you're wondering what you're doing wrong. The answer is you're not doing anything wrong. The answer is what you're doing wrong is you're not doing enough. You're not doing enough to kind of create momentum. And the reason you're not doing enough and you want to set goals and get outside of this is your comfort zone says 2 a day is good. 2 a day, I've been told 2 a day is good. I've been told 2 a day is okay, but you haven't thought through, was 2 a day meant to really mean 2 a day, or was 2 a day meant to get you started? So this is what my mentor taught me. He's like, if you really want to break out of that, what do you have to do? Well, Grant has another book called 10X, which should signify what you're supposed to do. He's like, what if you went from 2 to 20? Now you're accomplishing in 1 day what the average person does in 1 month. Is it possible to talk to 20 people a day? Yeah, kind of. It's possible to weed out 20 and get a presentation in front of 20 people. You can get the presentation in front of 20 people if you gather them in groups, or you have a methodology of getting information in front of people. Video always isn't best, but video is pretty good. Live presentation will always beat video. If you get somebody who can live present versus somebody who can video present, the person who can live present will always beat the person who's sending out videos, unless you have a list big enough to send it to. That's kind of the math behind that. So how do you get to 20? You were talking to 2 people a day, getting information in front of people. Now you're talking to 20. So that is a compounding effect. Now, you probably aren't going to be able to jump from 2 to 20 automatically. Why? Your comfort zone is going to pull you back in because you're like, that's crazy. Can't do that. But you can go to 5. So that's how you start. And systematically, and he said the only way this will work is if you systematically have a system that will push you outside of the 2 a day, and you're only going to do that through tracking. You're only going to do that through tracking because here's what's going to happen. You're going to think yourself back to 2 a day. Your comfort zone is going to pull you back there. Why? Because your comfort zone is built and your nervous system is built to keep you in that circle of 2 a day, even though your brain knows 2 a day isn't going to make it. You know that. That's why you get depressed inside your business. So here's what I learned. I learned a system to track it and push yourself outside that so you do more and more and more. And obviously, if you went from 2 a day to 10 a day, and you're doing 5 times as much as the average person, because the average person isn't doing anything. Let's say you're doing 5 times as much as the people who are working. You're doing 5 times as much. All of a sudden, you start succeeding 5 times faster. Now, that's going to piss some people off, but that's a good thing. So, during periods of expansion and contraction, businesses become so easy that individuals and companies are often hold into inflated impressions of their own abilities. They become conditioned to false sense of what it takes to be profitable. Again, that's what he's talking about, your comfort zone. It's like, oh, well, this is what it takes to be profitable. No, that's what it took during good times to be profitable. What does it take now? So then you have the quitters response. He said the third response to this expression by quitters, the people who think there's nothing they can do and will wait it out, the economy downturn until things return back to normal, at which time they will get back to working again. So this is a person that kind of sits and sulks and bitches and complains about everything that's going on. Woe is me, the economy. I just got my business started and now everything is bad. This group will basically be crushed financially and emotionally. They will go through all of their cash only to find out that the economic contraction can last much longer than they expected. In some cases, 18 months or longer. By the way, it took 27 years. Because they said that, the Great Depression only lasts like 5 years. It actually lasted like 27 years before the Dow got back to where it was prior to 1929, the large crash. They're talking about everything happening again at the end of this decade, by the way. So, prepare now. In some cases, it took longer. These people will find themselves emotionally damaged from being out of the workforce. Even when things are normalized, they will find it more difficult to get back to work because they haven't participated when the downturn was, so they're not prepared. Everybody else got prepared. The quitters are basically scavengers who depend on good economies, good times to provide enough cash for their friends and lifestyle. I found that they also, if their bills are $2,000, they decide to make $2,000 $1. Like, that's their idea of being ahead. Oh, I'm ahead. My bills are $2,000 and I have $2,001. No, you're completely screwed the moment something goes wrong. They travel from region to region, work in industries that are doing well but never really advance and conquer for themselves. So the last chapter, or the last point, number 4, is advance and conquer. Now, the last school of thought, the advance and conquer response, and the only one I promote as the only concept, basically response you should take. I encourage you to first embrace the idea that the market is difficult and has indeed changed, and acknowledge that it's going to be more challenging, but by no means impossible to sell your products and services and grow your business and even keep a job if that's where you're at. Know that it will require a completely unique sense of energy, work ethic, mindset, and actions, and mentally keeping yourself there, because that's the hardest part, because everybody around you is talking about how bad shit is, which is kind of like right now. Everybody's like, oh my God, it's so hard to find jobs. It's so hard to find people. It's so hard to find people. I was like, well, I recruited 3 people last week. It's not that hard. It's just hard for you because of where you're at and what you're thinking about and who you're around. An economic slowdown is obviously an obstacle for both businesses and individuals, but I will also show you that it's an opportunity for you. So starting a new company from scratch with just a little bit of money is very similar to going from a great economy to a very difficult one. If you don't have credit and you don't have money, customers are hard to come by and no one wants to see you. It's rough. The difference, however, with major economic change is that it isn't just happening to you. Everyone's finances are affected. Confidence is challenged. Selling is more difficult. Credit becomes tighter. Fewer opportunities exist. Banks aren't wanting to lend money. You're apt to be surrounded by negative people, complainers, cryberries, bitch, whine, cry, excuse makers, and have ideas and unworkable solutions. However, as I stated before, economic contraction also provides an opportunity to gain new clients, boost sales, different from yourself. Therefore, advance and conquer, dominate those negatively impacted. It says, I work at my first sales job during a recession of the 80s. Unemployment rates were more than 20% and interest rates were more than 18% where I lived and I worked. In hindsight, I probably should have moved but didn't have the money to do so. 1 out of 4 people could not buy the product I was selling due simply to the fact that they were out of work. I was lucky if 7 or 8 prospects showed interest in my product in a week. My survival was based on the most basic of actions, generating opportunities, and then learning how to handle the objections, stalls, and responses individuals came up with not to buy. This was my learning ground. And I have nothing else for comparison. So surviving recessions, it says, since I began my career in the late 80s, I've built 3 businesses and have endured and prospered during periods of economic contraction. Most people reading this book have also survived through those times. You simply might have forgotten that you did not come through each one of them better off. For instance, he was born in 1958's recession that lasted 2 years. I survived it. In fact, I didn't even know we were having one because obviously he was too young. I survived another one in the 60 to 61 when I was 3 years old. 73, there was an oil crisis. From the 80 to 82, the Iran Revolution caused an increase in prices of oil around the world that led to 18, 19, 20% interest rates. He said, I survived it too. In the early 90s, I experienced another recession that lasted a little over a year, including the housing bust, after which people swore they would never get back into real estate. I survived it in the year 2000. Brought the collapse of, in the year 2000, brought the collapse of the dot-com bubble, followed a year later by September 11th, 2001. So that way they blew up the World Trade Center, so that way they could hide some of the money. That's a whole nother topic. Causing tremendous economic fears around the world, especially in the United States, survived both of those. This was followed 2 years accounting scandals underneath, the contraction of our economy. So he had, some accounting issues, which made it through. And then 2007, the world experienced start of another contraction, which was the mortgage, real estate. This resulted in bank failures, bankruptcies, foreclosures, and subsequent failures of the entire industry. And that industry obviously supported and supplied a lot of money. The building industry was affected. The housing industry, contractors were affected, et cetera, et cetera. A recession, by definition, is typically a drop in gross domestic product of a country over 2 quarters or 180 days. Individuals and companies cannot actually experience a recession since they don't have a gross domestic product. However, they can certainly experience the effects of a recession. So, while I prefer to experience expansion, the reality is that I always have done the best during periods of contraction. Why has he always done the best? Because he's always found different ways to do it. He's always found different ways to plug in. Understand that economic contractions don't last forever. Those who don't quit, but instead dig in and get through it, will come out on the other end better, with a better work ethic, an increased customer base, and a bigger sense of the market. I've lived by the following motto: problems are opportunities, and conquered opportunities equal money earned. So one of the ideas here is you've got to put together a plan that can get you out. It says reason means proper exercise of the mind. You have to reason with what's going on. You have to be reasonable. So reason means proper exercise of the mind, sanity, the sum of intellectual powers, and the possession of sound judgment. Being unreasonable, there means that you won't allow yourself to be governed by or acted according to reason. So you've got to do some things that are outside the norm. When people are like, I wouldn't do that, that's what you probably need to do. Just last week I was working on a company that was identifying action following customers. So he tells a couple stories here. So then he gets down to this. He says, here's an exercise: 4 responses to economic contractions. Write down the 4 strategy responses to a contraction. Write down the names of the people who fit each of these responses. Write down examples of the time when you responded this way, and then write down which one of the responses you will commit to using daily. So that was one of the things that I did when I realized, I wanted to get ahead. And I didn't really focus, I didn't focus on what the economy was doing because I didn't give a shit. I really focused on myself, and I was like, well, I'm not getting where I want to get to. What are the people who are getting somewhere doing? And here's what I realized they were doing. They were doing more than what was recommended. They were doing more than what was recommended, and they were finding more creative ways to get in front of people, especially if you're in direct sales, network marketing, something like that. You have to find better creative ways to get in front of people. People are like, well, if you just go to gas stations and go to restaurants, well, I'm like, if you're unemployed and you don't have work, that's probably not the best place to go, especially now. I mean, the 3-foot rule is now the 6-foot rule, and now you can't understand what somebody's saying 3 inches next to you because they've got their mask on. I believe after this is over, we're all going to talk much louder because we're trying to yell at each other through these masks. and we're just going to figure out a way to get through it. So I've decided to use technology. I've decided to use leads. I've decided to use, some of the things that I know how to do from my other businesses to be able to attract more people. And, it allows you to go through, instead of 2 people a day, it allows you to go through about 100 people a day. So rather than finding one person a month, we're finding one person a day to join what we're doing, which obviously moves things along much faster. Do that for 90 days and bring on 90 new people, chances are you're probably going to have a completely different business. So that's what we got for today. Tomorrow is chapter 2 of this book, If You're Not First, You're Last, by Grant Cardone. Really good book, timing-wise, awesome. What else?
All right. If you guys haven't yet, you want to go to the Top Producer Show Facebook page and you want to go join that page. Also go follow us on YouTube. Each one of these videos is going to be uploaded to there, so that way if you'd like to go back and rewatch all these, you are more than welcome to. So with that, that is what we have for you guys today, and we will see you tomorrow.